Hey everybody, good morning. I am interviewing a dietitian, a registered dietitian, Michelle Hurn, who is going against the grain. This is something we don't see every day. And accept, okay, go live with run, eat meat, repeat. Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm good.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for
I
having me on.
discovered you on Ken Berry's podcast on his YouTube channel. As I was teaching my students, I teach a introductory nutrition course at Miami-Dade College, and we discovered this video, decided to watch it together, and I loved every second of it. So I had to find you and reach out, and I'm so glad that we're connecting and finally doing this. So Michelle Hearn, hi and welcome. Can you share a little bit about your background for my audience so that they know how exciting this is for me?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. My health story really begins when I was 12. I had a very serious eating disorder. I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was 5 feet tall, 57 pounds, put in inpatient treatment. Immediately fed the standard American diet, put on a 24-hour tube feeding. And obviously I did survive and become weight restored. But I was just told, you know what, you're going to have severe anxiety, probably depression, racing thoughts around food. Basically, as a 12-year-old, I was told, you're going to have to become a high-functioning person with an eating disorder. And that was true for most of my life, and I became a dietitian because I wanted to understand, I knew intuitively, like, food is powerful, food has an impact on your body. And of course, going through the traditional dietitian program, I was taught that, everybody needs carbs all the time. But even as a student, I would just ask questions. We'd go into the room of somebody with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor would say, okay, we're going to teach them to eat carbs, consistently throughout the day. And I would just ask questions. I would just say, oh, wow, their blood sugar is high. Should we reduce their carbs? And that's like blasphemy. No, everybody needs carbs. When I went into the ICU, I remember like flipping over the tube feeding formula, and I was like, oh my God, this is the same stuff I was fed as a 12-year-old. At that time, I was 24. Now I'm almost 40, and it's still the same. The number one ingredients of tube feeding is corn syrup solids, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil. So I would just ask questions like, is this really the best way to feed people? But the mantra, the dogma, the guidelines still say that it's calories, right? Like, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting protein and calories. And so I, kind of saw the cycle of sickness. Becoming a dietitian, most of my patients didn't get better. But, we're just told, like, hey, it's not the guidelines. Right. The patients aren't complying. But in 2019, I lost my own health. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. I'm a competitive runner. And I went from being able to run 18 to 20 miles to I couldn't run 5. I would go outside, I'd break out in cold sweat. And nobody could tell me what was wrong. I went to my doctor, everything was normal. I was eating about 400 grams of carbohydrates at the time. And my sports dietitian friends said, hey, you need to eat more carbohydrates, more calories. And of course, you can imagine that didn't go particularly well. And so I had a moment, I've talked about this on other podcasts. It was a rough day at the hospital, came home, fell asleep on the couch, and woke up 2 in the morning. And it just felt like my body was on fire. Like, everything hurt. I had no answers. Like, the medical system had failed me. I had tried eating, quote unquote, perfectly the nutrition guidelines, tried taking prescriptions, ibuprofen, alcohol, weed, like everything. And so, at that moment, at 2 in the morning, I went to 7-Eleven and got a bunch of ice and sit in the bathtub. And I'm crying, and that's when my wife was like, hey, you know what? I think we should do something different. Like, this isn't working. And I just said, I'm done. I'm done running. This is stupid. Clearly, I'm too old. I was 36. And I decided, like, if I'm not running, like, why not follow a lower carb diet? Like, I intuitively knew, like, this isn't making me feel good. But all my education said, you need this. Like, your brain will die. Your heart will explode if you eat a different way. So honestly, I was afraid. I was afraid to change. But, within a relatively short period, my health transformed. And, I ended up writing a book, and now I left the hospital setting. And so here we are today, doing much better.
Left the hospital setting in terms of your own health journey or in terms of employment?
in terms of employment. Like I was working as a registered dietitian in the hospital, and when I got my health back, I was so excited. I guess I was two things. One, I was angry because it's like nobody told me. Nobody told me like, hey, if you focus on protein and fat and you keep your carbohydrates low, my anxiety, it went from like paralyzing panic attacks to, I kid you not, like I came home, it was like 3 weeks after starting, a very high animal protein, low carb diet. My wife was like, this is the best your anxiety has been in 11 years, like 3 weeks. And, people like, that's a pretty dramatic transformation. And we know just keeping your blood sugar stable will help your anxiety. But I'm not taught as a dietitian just how crucial some of those micronutrients are. And nobody told me like, hey, zinc, B12, like your brain needs these things.
Right.
And even though I was eating meat, I was eating so much carbohydrate, so much grain, so much nuts, so much seeds.
Yeah.
Those things bind to those vitamins and minerals. I was severely anemic back in like 2012, 2013. So yeah, at first I naively thought like everyone in the hospital is going to be so excited about this. I'm going to present. I had all this data, like let's do this for a diabetic population. And of course, it's like,
yeah, you quickly discovered how it actually works, right? And I'm so glad that you shared that, because I remember when I was watching your interview on Ken Berry's YouTube, all I was thinking is like, wait, she's still working in a hospital? Like, I really want to know, how does that work? Because I don't feel like it's so different, so at odds with the general mainstream. And generally, when it's like a large company, like a hospital setting, they never ever want to rock the boat. They just follow what the guidelines say, They don't want to get sued. There's so many different reasons. But
that's what it is. Yeah. And that's why I was told, like, look, we could literally get sued, if we follow this. I'm like, but we have the evidence. It's not like we're trying, some type of strange supplement or procedure. I was like, we have really good evidence for low carbohydrate nutrition. And it was just like, absolutely not. And that became a very hard struggle, because it was like, how do I continue to work in a setting where I know the advice I'm legally required to give? Not that it's not going to help somebody, not that we're like neutral, it will literally harm you. And I couldn't do it. And I have dietitians and students reach out to me all the time and say like, I don't know what to do. I have student loans out the wazoo. I mean, I had to continue to work there until I was able to, find something. But I tell you, I mean, people ask me if I miss the hospital. I miss the paycheck. I make maybe a fourth right now of what I make, selling books. And I was telling my wife, I'm like, I wish being a good person was financially good. That's why most people don't do it. I'm fortunate my wife does a good job. It's hard. It's hard.
As you grow your brand, that you can make way, way more than you can ever make being employed, because there'll always be a cap on your employment. You're never gonna. Trust me, yeah, it's just social media is a lot of hustle, especially in the beginning, but eventually it starts to speed up, So the biggest advice I can give you is that just really like see this as the best thing that ever happened to you, because now what you are forced to do is really the best thing, because there's no upper cap, there's no one to limit you. You can literally become a multi-millionaire as you grow your presence as a coach, as a dietitian, and you have the classical education, and now once you add the entrepreneurial aspect to it, like that's how you make money. You never make money being employed,
Well, and even that, like, let's say, I never made any money from this. Like, I honestly don't care. I mean, I care, you have to live, whatever. But I mean, the whole goal, why we all went into health-related fields, is because we wanted to help other people. We genuinely care. Like, and when I worked in the hospital, like, people care. Like, nurses, doctors, they care. So it's like, what are you doing? And like, what I've done in the last few years since, I left 2020 has been more rewarding, more incredible, hopefully helped a lot more people than what I did the last
Bye. disconnect. Hopefully that'll work. We're good?
All right.
Oh, fantastic. Good. Yeah.
Yes.
So what I was saying is that, yeah, like the money aspect, we're not doing it for that, right? But it's also an indication of impact, right? So the more impact you have, the more lives you can reach. That also is reflected by more value, which is the money. So it's not about like this, you know, this dirty word, but in a way, it's important to also use that as a way, as a proxy of how much change can we really affect. Because if we're here, you know, barely making it in this field, trying to share the good message, there is no way we can really have even a tiny impact compared to the trillion-dollar industry, the food industry, that is trying to addict everybody. So it's like there is an imbalance in power. So we cannot, like, we want to have the most impact. Like this is important for Americans, for the world, you know, and we are positioned, because I'm also a classically trained dietitian, so we're in this perfect position because of our academic background, because we have the credibility. Not that I think this degree should give us the credibility, because obviously it was all wrong, but you know what I mean. You know, it's like, why not go for it, you know?
Yeah,
and it being the best thing that ever happened for me. It wasn't like I had to stop working in a setting. I chose, because I just couldn't deal, you know, like, and I knew there was always going to be an upper limit, you know, and I saw the opportunity and the impact that I can do with coaching clients, you know, growing the YouTube, growing the Instagram. You know, YouTube has also, eventually, as you get into the millions, then there's a very, very appreciable ad revenue. But even before you get there, there's all the clients in the coaching program. I think that is something that is very lucrative, and this is how you can help people one-on-one. And you're in a great position because you're in the minority, because the vast majority of dietitians are not knowingly harming their patients, you know, so we need more people like you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You know, and there's a few things that I'm working on right now that I'm pretty excited about. You know, I've spoke pretty openly about having an eating disorder and how I think that the treatment for eating disorders is really poor, and it's not standardized. I mean, you could go to California or Texas and get a totally different treatment. You know, the mortality rate is really high.
Wow.
The relapse rate is over 50%. And so, yeah, you know, working on some papers. We have actually really good case studies for bulimia and binge eating disorder, utilizing the ketogenic diet, but also anorexia, you know, which is a totally controversial topic. Like, oh my God, restrict somebody, right. You know, but I'm excited to hopefully be part of the paradigm shift, you know, because I wish when I was 12, 15, 17, 20, somebody had said like, hey, you know what, if you try eating this way, see if it doesn't help your anxiety, see if it doesn't heal your body, you know. So yeah,
I'm so excited to see everything that you're doing. You know, like I said, it's so rare to come across somebody like you. So this is why I got so excited when I heard your story. And you know, to go back to what they told you, like, oh, we could literally be sued. It's like, why? Why are we legally required to follow this organization who just some psycho invented, the American Dietetics Association? It was literally like somebody who was driven by ideology and had nothing to do with science. Zero scientific.
Yeah, no, I wrote about it in my book. Like, it's gnarly, you know, it's visions from God. Like, it's absolutely insane. It has no science base. And actually, a lot of the statements that were made, the foundation, were based on this science that was conducted under the Loma Linda University roof. Like, that would be like me, you know, conducting an experiment in my kitchen and it doesn't work. And I'm like, no, we'll just say it works, you know, and put that out as fact. Yeah, so why are we, you know, and I talked to Dr. Robert Silas about this, the carb addiction doctor. Like, they are now in a position where they legally have to, if someone's cholesterol is high, they have to give them a statin. Because let's say they give them a statin and they die of a heart attack. Well, it's okay, we give them a statin. They don't give them a statin and they die of a heart attack, they can get sued. So it's like we are shaping society to where horrible things can happen to you, but it's like, I mean, it benefits the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. It's all about money, and it's really, really sad. And I think people have to really, really take your blinders off and be like, if you want to be a healthy human, if you want to have good health, you are going to have to advocate for yourself. You're going to have to educate yourself. Your doctor is going to tell you to eat whole grains and move more. Your dietitian's going to tell you that same thing. They're going to prescribe you medications. You have to ask tough questions, and you have to say, like, exactly. No, this does not make sense.
Exactly. They are definitely just as much of a victim as the patient is, because the dietitians, like I was trained and like you were trained, we were just brainwashed, you know, and it took us so long to finally understand that it was all wrong, right? Same thing as a medical doctor, you know, they barely have time to breathe, let alone dedicate another 10 hours a day to research everything they're being taught to see. Is that really true? You know?
No, it is. No, and I hope people understand, like, we are so over at the hospital. Like, you might have 23 patients to see in 8 hours, and you got to chart 20 to 30 minutes. And so you are running. Like, I would get anxiety when a patient would start to tell me a story. Like, oh, let me tell you about my daughter. It was like, oh, nope, wrap it up. Like, that's how we're just, and you're not supposed to get overtime. It's not set up to really hear you, to help you, to sit with you, right? Like, it's set up to just, like, I got to check these boxes so we get insurance reimbursement, get out of here. It's not a good system. And it's hard. Like, I don't blame, like you said, this is our education. Our education has taught us this way. And it is, you know, the Academy of Nutrition, governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by processed foods. When you are sponsored by Coca-Cola, when you are sponsored by Sara Lee, PepsiCo, Ensure, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that, you know, you're sponsored by them. So you have to, like, advocate for them. You have to take in their products. You have a financial responsibility. And it came out last year that the Academy is actually investing in their stock. And it blows my mind that more dietitians don't say, like, look, this is a conflict of interest. We can't have the Academy investing in Coca-Cola stock. But you know what they tell us? They tell us, like, oh, it's fine. It's just, we just tell patients to eat it in moderation, drink it in moderation. That's absolute nonsense. I have dietitians at least 2 or 3 times a week send me really, I say tactfully, unkind messages saying pretty terrible things, saying that I'm promoting eating disorders, I'm promoting restricting, that, you know, I lose my license. And it's like, this is where we're at right
and
now.
isn't it criminal that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics isn't looking into the addiction research, how sugar is far more addictive than heroin? The studies that have been done on rats back in 2017, we've got multiple studies that show very clearly that rats will prefer the sweet taste over heroin by a large margin. Forget about cocaine. Those were old studies. Yeah, everybody knows sugar is more addictive than cocaine. What about the heroin studies? There is not one single addictive substance that was shown to be addictive in rats that didn't also eventually was shown to be addictive in humans. So why is it that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is allowing Coca-Cola to be at their conferences every year and, you know, sponsoring and working hand in hand together? That's criminal. When are the dietitians, when are we going to start suing these organizations? You know, why are we sitting here and allowing this to happen to us? This is criminal behavior.
I agree. And, you know, I've heard, like, when are we going to have a class action lawsuit? And, you know, I don't know. Like, I because these big companies are so powerful, like, my hope is a little bit low. Like, I admire, I'm actually going to DC in June to sit with some of, like, you know, Dr. Bullock and Dr. Finney to see if we can't get some, like, a low carb option on the guidelines. But, you know, it's so hard. We've advocated, I've been on boards where we go and we try to, but the boards have been bought by Coca-Cola. There's several people on these food guideline boards that have big, you know, so they're just, they don't care. But you're right. When it comes to sugar, when it comes to these highly processed carbohydrates, first of all, nobody should have type 2 diabetes. If anybody's listening to this and they know somebody that has type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, we have really good studies. And please get on my Instagram, shoot me a message. We were able to get people off as much as 150 units of insulin, that's a lot, in 8 days. Not 8 weeks, 8 years, 8 days on a low carbohydrate diet. You know, so we have good studies that within 2 weeks, your cells can become more sensitive to insulin when you stop taking in so much carbohydrates and sugar. But when we tell people, you know, to eat all these carbohydrates, once you get on insulin, it's very hard to get off without changing your diet. I've never seen it without somebody changing their diet in the 11 years I was in the hospital. And, you know, Dr. Georgia E., like she I don't know if she published it, but she put in her research that, and not just, we have to stop thinking too about sugar and carbohydrates and protein and fat in terms of calories. I want dietitians, I want everyone to start thinking about this in terms of how does this impact our hormones? How does this impact, you know, how does this impact glucose? How does this impact insulin? How does this impact our brain? They have a really good study that people who were eating a lot of processed foods, so, you know, donuts, cereal, cookies, cakes, seed oils, what happens in your brain. So we know we get a blood sugar spike, and, you know, and when you get a blood sugar spike, you also get a dopamine release. You know, if people think about it, they have a cookie, it's like, oh, I feel really great. You know, you get that crash. But we also saw that over time, it was impacting glutamate and GABA. Those are two neurotransmitters in your brain. People that were consuming high amounts of processed foods had levels of glutamate up to 100 times the normal amount in the brain. And we see this a lot in traumatic brain injury and people doing like cocaine and other things. What that does is it actually turns off neuroplasticity. It stops your brain from being able to mold, change, take in new information, deal with stress. So eating all these processed foods is literally preventing people from coping with stress, from taking in information, you know, being able to process. Think if you're dealing with anxiety or depression, you need to be able to process and move on. And, you know, what happens if somebody's dealing with that? We just give them a pill.
Wow.
Give them a pill, you know. Does my diet impact it? Oh, sure, eat healthy.
That's amazing. I love the glutamate study. I think that's so powerful because I do hold addiction recovery meetings and support meetings for people to be able to stick to a carnivore diet and at the very least, like, not eat the sugar and not relapse. And understanding the science and the physiology behind it makes it easier to understand. You're not losing your mind, especially in the initial phase of getting sober, you know, that there is literally a shifts in your physiology that eventually will heal, but in the beginning you can't trust your thoughts and your emotions until all of that healing happens, you know.
Yeah, my first, you know, because I was eating 450 grams of carbohydrates when I was an athlete, you know, in 2019. And I would say most of them were these quote unquote healthy. It wasn't like I was drinking Coca-Cola, you know, I was eating rice, potatoes, but, you know, I was having desserts and other things. That first like week, there were times I felt like I wanted to claw my eyes out. I was shaky. I was just, it literally was like withdrawal, you know, it's very, very hard. As you know, and like you said, when your body figures it out, everything is a million times better. But those food substances are designed, and if you don't understand, if you don't know what's happening, you feel dizzy and shaky and be like, oh, I need more carbs,
Right.
oh, I need more sugar. And, you know, so you're right. And I was thinking this morning, like, we have just, from the time we get up to the time we go to bed, we are training our children, we're training our, you know, to eat sugar. It's here's your orange juice with your cereal. Let me pack your granola bar, have pasta at lunch, have chips, come home, have pizza, have a cookie. Like, we've got no shot, you know? The fastest growing demographic of obese humans is children ages 2 to 5, you know? The youngest person I saw with type 2 diabetes was 8. You know, he was over 200 pounds. And we just complicate it, you know? We tell people like, oh, it's genetics, it's this, it's that. It's like, yeah, okay. Yes, genetics, obviously things play a different role, but that's not why people are obese. It starts with what you're eating, 100,000%. It's not how much you're moving, it's not whatever. What are you putting in your body? I have yet to meet an obese human that, you know, has been eating a low carb diet. Like, I don't think it exists, just because how it impacts your hormones. Someone, I'd be happy if someone can show me prove me wrong, you know, send me an email. This person's been eating this way for 20 years and they're obese.
Yeah, and you know, just looking at the obesity prevalence rates when they were almost non-existent and just skyrocketed ever since the 1980s with high fructose corn syrup and, you know, all the food industry now becoming those drug dealers, literally knowing what kind of business model they're in, you know, and just adding sugar and salt and fat to everything. You know, our genetics, they don't change in just the span of a few decades, right? So yeah, exactly.
So, and we're eating all the time too. I've noticed this. Like I'm competitive. I do ultra marathons now. So I run distances over 50 miles. And I eat, and this is different for every person, but I probably eat 3 to 4 times a day. I see, you know, driving around, whatever, I see people eating all the time. Why are you eating 6, 7 times a day? You know, and like you said, it's mostly these sugary, quick, it's everywhere. We have made our modern food environment to where, you know, if you're dealing with addiction, it's like, those images, you know, you checking sports, there's an image of this. You're driving to the gas station, it's this, it's selling. There's constantly sugar and carbs. You work wherever you work. I used to hate this. You work in a hospital, there's always cookies and donuts and crap. Like, hey, we're treating someone dying of diabetes, you want a donut? Like, it's just this crazy cognitive dissonance. So I think as a society, we have to do a better job. Like, once again, you have to rise above. You have to know that people are going to give you a hard time. Don't you want to eat this? Everybody does. Grandma made this. You have to say, you know what? No, that's okay. Yeah. I'm doing this for my health. And it's not just like, people have asked me, like, oh, do you eat this way for your running? No, I eat this way because when I'm 80, I need to be able to carry my groceries. And I don't want to have heart disease. And I don't want to have dementia. And I want to be a good partner. And I have a dog that I want to walk. People used to live to 100, 110, like we have primitive societies, you know, you could argue, okay, they had diseases and whatever, but it wasn't food related things. If you're going to be a healthy human, you need to be eating in my clinical opinion, experience, whatever, a diet where the foundation is highly bioavailable protein and fat. You know, if the whole world, and I'm not anti-plant, I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I think most people can tolerate small amounts of, you know, whatever. Right. I eat some carrots and berries, whatever. But the foundation to keep your blood sugar stable and survive nutrition
Agreed.
Really needs
100%. And yeah, especially I think if somebody never got to an extreme end of the food addiction cycle, they're fine even with fruits. Maybe that's not, you know, as long as it's unprocessed, although you could make the argument that the fruits aren't really natural anymore. So about 300 years, right? Exactly. There's like frankenfruits that we never had access to them. But even with that, you know, if all you ate growing up was just fruits and meats and a little bit of veggies, you wouldn't develop food addiction. It is after you've been sensitized. And the problem is after you've been sensitized, like over maybe 85% of Americans already have that addiction taken hold in their brains. Now we get to a point where if they have the carrot, it is a trigger because they remember the sweet taste and it creates cravings. So it's become even harder now to eat healthy because now all you can do is just meats, basically. If you really want to not have the cravings, not go through withdrawals or have the triggers and constantly be fighting with that, at least initially to heal the brain, you know? And so it's a real problem, and I think addiction is the future of what I'm working with, because I've worked a lot with carnivore and I still do, and I like most of my audience is carnivore, but I've realized that the future is addiction because everybody knows whole unprocessed foods is the way to go. They just can't do it, whatever kind of diet you give them, even if it's carnivore, you know. And that's because they don't realize what they're up against. They're up against a serious, severe addiction that, from the looks of it right now, the studies that are coming out is so chilling. It's far more severe than the hard drugs. Sugar is a harder drug than the hard drugs. And so,
yeah, you know, you made a really interesting point that a lot of people I've talked to, and you know, you see, they know. It's not like a lack of knowledge. It's like, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't have this. And so it's, and I've had people, when I worked in the hospital, I had a woman tell me she would rather die than give up cake, you know. And I see children drinking soda. Like, it's not a lack of knowledge, you know. It's like and that's the definition of addiction, right? I know this is bad for me. I continue to use this, and I even continue to let my children use this. I continue I personally can't stop. They can't stop. That's really interesting to me. And just as somebody who, like, you know, like you said, I'll observe people. It's like, how interesting that a lot of people know this will help me. I mean, to the point where, I mean, I've dealt with people who are massively depressed, massively, but like, you can't take my soda. And that's another thing. I mean, we don't teach enough, in my opinion, emotional management skills and coping skills, you know, from the time people are very young. It's like, oh, you're crying, here's a cookie. Oh, you're sad, you're happy. Like, we kind of sugar. So teaching people to have
emotional management skills. Yeah.
And we also, yeah, and this is also, and I also told we gotta toughen up a little bit. You know, this is just, and you know, my non-existent children are perfect. Karina and I don't have kids, but I feel like you don't have to love everything you eat. You don't have to love everything you do. I have nieces and nephews, and I just feel like we're teaching these kids, like, you know, everything needs to be fluffy bunny and easy and play video games. You need to be tough. Get out there and do sprints, run up a hill, eat some liver, like, toughen up.
Right. You know, I tried to work with,
but your life will be better.
exactly. But see, here's the thing. You can't give a child a drug that's more addictive than heroin and then expect them to enjoy the taste of steak, right? It's like that's all they're gonna want, and they don't have the fully developed prefrontal cortex for their discipline to be able to to use that, you know. And so it's the hardest clients of mine, and I don't think I can take on any clients. I turn them down all the time if they're children. I know it's not going to work unless the parents are going all in and they're going to homeschool the child. Then maybe there is a chance. But if you send them off to school with all of their friends using, because that's the real world, they're using the drugs, and then you go on the weekend to your dad who doesn't care and is not on the same page with them, I'm like, the child stands no chance, you know. So I don't even take those cases anymore. It's really horrific what we're doing to the children, you know. So yeah, no child is ever going to choose. Their taste buds are so worn out from the drugs. Their brains are so worn out, and we've had the studies now that show how your brain stops enjoying real whole foods the moment you give them a high sugar, high fat food combo for the past 8 weeks. Now they no longer enjoy the same foods that they used to enjoy before, and vice versa. You clean up the diet, all of a sudden now your brain lights up when you're eating real whole foods. You actually like them, you enjoy them, you know. And so yeah, it's with the children is the hardest situation. So you said you don't have children, right? Yeah, me neither.
No, we don't.
But my clients, that's the kind of stuff that I go through with my clients, and we always come to the same conclusion. Maybe they're not ready yet, and the truth is that it's got to be a complete overhaul of the system, really, literally, like homeschooling the child. And that's another thing too, is that why we need addiction and food addiction to be included in the DSM-5 is because I do have those clients where they're separated. The one parent wants to do the right thing and understands addiction. The other parent doesn't care, and they're going to feed the child all the drugs, right? And so, but because it's not in the DSM-5, that's not child abuse. You know, the fact that the other parent is feeding the child drugs is not considered abuse, and so they can do that. And now that poor child doesn't have a plan in place that would guarantee sobriety, you know. So
well, you know, a lot of dietitians don't even believe food addiction exists. That's what I was told. I was told that it's just an excuse to eat whatever you want. So that's what happens when you're sponsored by the food industry. So yeah, no, I hear you, and I think I wouldn't have good answers, just like it sounds like you wouldn't, for what you do with kiddos. I do think regardless, even if you have kids going to school or whatever, like modeling good behavior at home is so important, and I think kind of setting the precedence, because I've seen this in my nieces and nephews, like, this is how we do, this is how we eat, this is how we whatever. And kids are very smart, and they care. Like you said, I don't know what you do when you send them out to the world and there's all kinds of stuff, but at least having that kind of structure and that understanding, like, hey, this is why we don't eat this. Like, I know a lot of your friends are going to eat this, but this can be really hurtful for you. This can make you feel pretty sick.
The easiest thing is to
Yeah.
never have them be exposed to it. Like, I don't know if you know who Kelly Hogan is. She's been a carnivore for, yeah. So her kids don't know what sugar is because ever since they were born. Yeah, that's the
Oh
easy stuff,
gosh.
you know, because they don't even, they get invited to birthdays and they don't care. She'll make them like a specific sugar-free cake with like sugar-free, no artificial sweeteners, you know, just with whipped cream and vanilla in it. And they'll have that and no problem. The problem happens once they're no longer naive to the drug. That is when it's almost impossible unless you overhaul your whole life, you know? So it's a real problem. And
Mhm.
like you said, yes, dietitians and so many dietitians, so many doctors, it's like unless you're doing the research, unless you've personally gone through it, you don't really know that everything you've been taught was wrong. You don't have a reason to believe it's wrong because it hasn't happened to you. So, you know,
Well, and I do think that cognitive dissonance is powerful. You know, I remember right before I left the hospital, I had a a dietitian I worked with said like, you know, I think I'm worried about you and your diet because I was eating, you know, high meat, high fat. You know, she's like, I just think this is long term is going to be really bad for you. And so, like, some context, I went from being anxious, couldn't run. I was training for, you know, I was so healthy. I was training for a ultra marathon. And this person was obese. She was telling me
that's
that what I
hilarious.
was eating was bad for me. And isn't it, and also, but if, I think if doctors, if dietitians, if people, you know, when I worked in Boulder, Colorado, a dietitian retired, she'd been there 35 years. If I believe this, if I'm like, oh my gosh, this is hurting people, then I have to come to terms with the fact that I've been giving dangerous, potentially deadly advice for years. You know, that's a hard thing. Like, I had to come to terms with that. Like, gosh, what I've been telling people for a decade is could hurt people, you know? And I think it's really hard to say, like, I was wrong. I am wrong. This institution is wrong. Most people
Yeah,
don't want to do
yeah.
that.
Denial is real, and it's like that psychological immune system that people put up, right, in order to protect their ego and the
Yeah.
implications of what it would mean if they actually entertained the thought that that was true. You know, and that a lot of doctors, same thing, you know, they have a ton of debt, you know, student debt, and just started working. They figured it out. It's like, oh my gosh, I have all this debt that I gotta pay back. Like, it's not even an option for me to entertain that those other things might be right and I might be wrong. So they kind of just like put the blinders on and do what they gotta do until they're put in a situation where they can no longer be in denial, where it just becomes too hard to push that down and push it away, you know? Yeah. Yeah, when you
100%,
are
you know?
being rewarded financially for a certain set of beliefs, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, there's this saying, like, don't ask somebody to believe or practice in a certain way
Yeah,
that's against their paycheck. You know, like, nope, sorry, I can't hear it. You know, but it is interesting that we live in a society where we all most people would agree that whole foods is the best way to go, and we know statistically most people eat a lot of processed foods. You know that the junk food industry isn't increasing exponentially because people aren't eating it. You know, it's increasing exponentially because people continue to come back, like you
yep,
said, because it's designed to be addictive, and they start from a very young age, getting your kids. And, you know, having worked in the hospital, what we feed our hospital patients is criminal. All these processed foods, you know, from the time you're a kid to the time you're elderly, and that has consequences. You know, what I saw in the hospital setting is would break people's heart. You know, and I'm sure you probably saw that as well in like your hospital rotations, like these open
yep,
wounds, you know, amputation. And I use an example of like food being a true addiction. I'll never forget, we had a guy who literally had his leg amputated. So leg, and he was put on this, you know, carb controlled diet, still, you know, I think of like
yeah.
80 grams of carb, or
Oh,
sorry, 40 grams of carbs every meal. And he literally left the floor as soon as he could, wheeled himself out in a wheelchair to the
wow,
cafeteria to get a donut. He was that addicted, like the day after amputation. So yeah, tell me that's not an addiction. Like,
wow. Yeah, there you go. The, the the food companies, the reason why they're $1 trillion industry is because they are drug dealers that have been allowed to practice their business in broad daylight without any sort of regulation. At least preventing them from from marketing to children. Like we don't even have that. And they continuously try to engineer even more addictive concoctions. I think we're dealing with a very, very severe addiction, far, far worse than heroin. Because if the studies are showing just the pure sweet taste is more addictive than heroin, we're beyond that with the food industry. It's now figuring out how much carbs and sugar and fat and salt and caffeine to pack in one bomb, you know, to maximize the amount of dopamine release. And it's like you keep offering these new products that people stand literally no chance. No chance. They don't even know they're addicted. Like they haven't even stepped out of the night.
Well, and it's literally, I mean, it's a lot of people's full-time job. Like, what an interesting full-time job. But food scientists, how can I light up, like you said, how can I engineer this? How can I chemically modify this to make your brain light up as much as possible, to basically keep you coming back? You know, and I always thought it's not funny, but it's kind of maybe potentially ironic that they advertise it. Like, they're marketing.
Right.
Once you pop, you can't stop. Bet you can't eat just fine. Like, they're literally telling you, we're going to override your brain. Good luck, you know? And it's so interesting. We would, as a society, we would never allow, like you said, like potentially dangerous drugs. Like we would never allow heroin or cocaine or whatever to be marketed, addicted at the grocery store. We would never allow alcohol. If you gave a toddler a fifth, you would be put in jail, you know? But when it comes to sugar, we're just like, sounds good. Whatever. Yeah, so it's very
onset is a major hallmark of addiction. So the younger you hook them, the much more severe of an addiction they'll struggle with in their life. They know that. The tobacco companies actually started buying the food companies as we were suing them, you know, and they started going down. They discovered that there's another addictive product that can work in that same business model. And so they started buying those food companies and they literally trained them. They took the 5 A's of addiction business model and they trained them and they've implemented them very successfully to this day with the food companies. So you got to have something addictive. That's the first A. You got to make it available so that you can find it anywhere, and affordable. So it's very easily available to you, you know? And then now that you have the addiction and it is right around you, now you want to trigger the action of you actually getting it, and that's with advertising, the cues and the triggers. So this is like a remote control from afar. When you see an ad for a food, that's like them using a remote control to trigger your brain. It lights up for you to go get the drug. And finally, age of onset. The younger you target your clients, the more of a severe addiction you ingrain in their brain, and the harder it is for them to break free over their lifetime. And so they've done all 5 with the tobacco companies. As they were targeting teenagers, Congress stepped in and stopped them from doing that with the Joe Camel campaign, where they started using cartoons on the tobacco, right? Yeah. So that was, I think it was a JAMA paper that got published that showed how this campaign increased the amount of teen smokers by some like 400%, something crazy like that. So based on that paper, Congress stepped in and stopped them. But no one is stopping the food industry. So the age of onset is like cereal for children, sugar in baby food. It's
baby formula too, like infant formulas, corn syrup. You know.
I don't know, scary stuff. We're doing the best that we can. So
yeah, I think education, you know, one, just making people aware of like how bad this is, and then empowering people like what can you do about this? You know, you have to, like, once again, nobody's going to come and tell you, no doctor, hopefully more dietitians in the future, but people aren't going to educate you about this. So you have to make some tough choices, like, you know, and sugar addiction too, it doesn't necessarily mean like you're obese. Like I was never obese as an athlete. I mean, I would even say at points I was underweight. But my anxiety was so severe. If I didn't eat every 2 or 3 hours, I would be dizzy and shaky. Like that's not normal, you know? So I'm hopeful that, you know, as we continue to advocate like grassroots and you know, when you hear this, share this with somebody else, tell more people.
Yeah, I agreed. And we do have a quick question. What's your advice to someone who can't digest beef well at all? Can it be fixed? Yes. Oftentimes, if you haven't eaten a carnivore diet for a long enough period of time, you've eaten a lot of plants, your stomach starts to downregulate its production of HCl, or hydrochloric acid. And so you can gradually increase the amount of protein you're eating and take HCl supplements. And also, so it's called betaine HCl usually, and bile, ox bile as well. All those things are going to help you in initial phases until your body ramps up its own production. But that's very common. So don't look at that as a sign that that's not the right diet. You know, it's just, we kind of have to remind our bodies of what our species specific diet was, you know, because we've been so far away from it for decades in some cases.
Yeah, the body is really smart, right? If you're eating a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of plants, like those are more alkaline. Those don't need that HCl and that ox bile, and so your body will, like you said, will downregulate that. But I have people that over time, like there's really good digestive enzymes you can get that, you know, maybe even some that have like the protease, that protein digesting, that have HCl and whatever. Yeah, I would give your body, you know, within 4 to 6 weeks, you should be able to your body wants to do the right thing, right?
Agreed. And like, also I see here that lamb works better, and I agree with that 100%. So it seems that historically it was cheaper and easier for us to access lamb. So in those cases, it might be that your genetics just do much better with lamb, and so just go for lamb. I know it's more expensive, but I think most people fare easily or much better with lamb than with beef. Also, it's usually very low in histamines, so that could also be a problem, you know, for some people, histamine intolerance. What about drinking kombucha to help your belly? I don't generally recommend it. I don't know. What do you say, Michelle?
No, I mean, kombucha most of the time is just sugar. Like if you like it, it's just full of different types of sugar. I'm not, you know, I think some, you know, cultures over time did fermented foods. You know, if you get to a point where you're wanting to add some type of, you know, we do a little bit of sauerkraut once in a while, some yogurts. I think things like that is fine. But I mean, I would imagine that's kind of further on down the line, especially if you're mostly focusing on a carnivore-based diet. But yeah, a lot of that stuff is just the amount of actual probiotics in there. Somebody said it would be like, you know, drinking orange juice for the vitamin C. It's like you're drinking all this sugar for this tiny bit of that. You know, I would rather have some fermented vegetables.
Right. And I even stumbled across a lot of studies that show a correlation between a lot of fermented food intake and rates of gastric cancer. And when I did, a lot of them. And so when I did a YouTube video on that, everybody lost it because a lot of people love their fermented foods. There are whole accounts and like public health experts that all they do is work with fermented foods and recommend it and write books on it. So it caused a little bit of a ruckus there. But hey, you know, I just don't shoot the messenger. It's good to know about this stuff, and then you make your decision. I generally don't want to do that, and I don't include it in my diet. I don't think there's anything necessary that you're not going to find in meat or animal protein and animal fats, you know?
Yeah, you know, when people ask me too, like, oh, my dog's been so good. Now he's standing in the park. About like probiotics. Like I want to take this probiotic, or my doctor, my dietitian, someone said probiotic. We have no evidence that taking a probiotic helps. And you're kind of like shooting in the dark when you take a random probiotic. Like your stomach we have actually really good studies that like the diversity of your stomach is really good on like ketogenic diets versus other plant-based diets. So, I mean, I don't recommend probiotics in general just because I haven't seen any evidence that it's actually
just a study came out not that long ago. I reported on that like a couple of weeks ago about how they got 3 groups of people, gave them antibiotics. One group didn't give them anything after the antibiotic round. Another group, they gave them fecal microbiota transplant. So they had taken out their stools and prepared them and then gave them back to them as a form of probiotic, right, in terms of like an enema. And then the third group was given the probiotic after the antibiotic course ended. And the ones who were given the probiotics fared the worst in terms of restoring their microbiome to its initial state. So even at this even at the 6 months mark after the end of the antibiotic course, they still did not have healthy microbiome. Whereas the ones who didn't take anything did much better. The ones who did the best were the ones who did the FMT, the fecal microbiota transplant after the antibiotic course. So I thought that was very interesting too.
That is, that almost is this kind of confirmation that we can't really override our body's natural ability to restore things. Once again, you're taking a pill. We just don't know. We don't know what specifically your body
Exactly.
needs,
We
has,
barely scratch the
whatever.
surface of what kind of bacteria do we really need and what proportion to, so it's like you barely know this stuff, and trying to play around with it might not be the best idea. Maybe the FMT seems the best potential course, if you wanted to take that route. So I know that Instagram lately has been limiting us, unfortunately, to the 1 hour mark, and it just tells me in the last 20 seconds, you've got 20 seconds, and I'm like ramping up. So I want to give you enough time to share with everybody how they can find you. Do you take clients? How they can work with you? Your books, like all the good stuff.
Yeah, so obviously I'm on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. I have a website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. I actually have my book right here. So The Dietitian's Dilemma is my book that is available on Amazon. And yeah, I take a limited amount of clients. So I ask people, like, I really want people that are kind of, let's do this. I usually ask people to commit to 3 sessions. But yeah, if you're interested in working with me, at least hearing about kind of what I do and how I work, I just, feel free to send me a direct message or an email.
Fantastic. I'm going to save this and post it on my YouTube channel as well. So I'll make sure to link all of your socials, your book, and all the good stuff in the description box below. So if you're watching this on YouTube, check it out and make sure you give this video a like, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you so much, Michelle. Is there anything that you would like to end with?
Gosh, thank you so much for having me on. It's like I said earlier, I feel like my message to people, like, your body and your brain, the capacity of your body and your brain to heal is beyond what anyone has let you believe. Like, if you're watching this and you're severely depressed, you're obese, like, there is hope. So that's kind of always what I like to
absolutely. Plenty of people are doing it just when they're given the right toolbox and when we understand what our species-specific diet really is, and once we understand also how the lengths that those food companies are going to in order to addict us, then things start to get a lot easier. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully we'll do more collabs in the future. I think everybody should know about you and the work that you're doing, and I'm just so proud of the courage it took to quit that job at the hospital. And that wasn't easy, but this may have been the best thing, because like we talked about earlier, I think the sky is the limit.
We're going to help a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for sticking with us till the end, and I will see you in the next one. Bye everyone.